Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Apocrypha Apocalypse. I'm Gary Machuda, and we're continuing our series where we're looking at how Martin Luther debunks John Calvin's claim that the Council of Trent had taken new measures and adopted new supports from the so-called Apocrypha, giving it authority that it never before possessed. Well, we're already in this series, and we're seeing how if that's so, then apparently Martin Luther had already anticipated Trent by using these books in a canonical fashion in debate to serve as proof. And we're going to continue to look at some of Martin Luther's debates here on the Apocrypha Apocalypse. So fasten your seatbelts, folks, because Apocrypha Apocalypse begins right now. Okay, is it true that Trent gave the Deuterocanon of the Old Testament, those 7 Old Testament books, authority they never before possessed and used them as new supports for Catholic teaching? Well, all you have to do is learn a little bit about Martin Luther's career and you find out, no, that's not true. In fact, we're assessing Luther's appreciation of the Deuterocanon from the earliest times back in 1516 all the way up until 1519, where he rejects the canonicity of Second Maccabees. And then we're actually going to go even beyond Second Lipsic Disputation to learn a little bit about how Luther received these books. Now, so far in our survey, we looked at the very first disputation. Actually, is through a student of Luther's, followed by the famed Heidelberg Disputation, 1518. We saw how Luther deduced Sirach in one of his theses of that debate, and he even formally introduced it. So if you want to see that, just go one video earlier in the series and you'll see that. We're moving on to the next disputation, and that is the resolutions on the disputation concerning the power of indulgences that was published in April 1518. Now, this work is important. It is, first, it's one of those works that H.H. Howarth mentioned in the very first series, who was a Protestant theologian who noted that Luther seems to be using the Deuterocanon as canonical scripture in these debates prior to 1519, but he only gives one reference. And so today we're going to show actually he uses it much more expansively than even Howarth picked up on. So what is this? Resolutions. So when Martin Luther published his 95 Thesis in October 1517, they never were actually formally debated, right? Those were theses challenging people to debate, and that debate just never happened. So Luther wanted to compose an explanation and a defense of these theses for the public. And the result is this work that we're looking at right now. We're in the Heidelberg Disputation. It represents a development in Luther's theology of the cross. The resolutions that we're looking at right now represent, quote, one of the most important documents written during his formative years, for it was written and revised over a period of several months. How inexorably his doctrine of justification by faith alone was compelling him to break with the past. In other words, this is a major development in his thinking. In fact, Bernard Loos says the resolutions to be his first true Reformation writing. So again, very formative, very important document within Luther's thought. It was originally planned to be published in 1517, but the work was delayed. Eventually, it made it to print in late August 1518. One of the most important features of this disputation is that it is drawn up as if it's a formal disputation, meaning that it has an introduction known as a protestatio, or an introduction declaration. And that's important because before a debate, you would state what methodological preconditions you're going to rely on to substantiate your arguments. And so Luther has this type of declaration at the beginning. And it reads, quote, declaration. Because this is a theological disputation, I shall repeat here the declaration usually made in the schools in order that I may pacify the individuals who perhaps are offended by the simple text of the disputation. First, I testify that I desire to say or maintain absolutely nothing except, first of all, what is in Holy Scripture and can be maintained from them, and then what is in or from the writings of the Church Fathers and is accepted by the Roman Church and preserved both in the canons and in the papal decrees, unquote. So here we have a declaration of principles. And the first principle he states is he will maintain absolutely nothing except what he finds in Holy Scripture and can be maintained by them. It's not quite an affirmation of the later doctrine of sola scriptura or the Bible alone, but it does place Scripture in a place of primacy over all the other purely human works. So the early church fathers, for example, canon law, those are also important in this declaration, but Scripture is first. And he says he's only going to maintain only what can be maintained in Scripture. So when we look through this work, the resolutions to the disputation concerning the power of indulgences, we find the following. In Thesis 15, it says, in the next place, 2 Thessalonians 1, 8, 9 states, those who did not believe in the gospel will suffer the punishments of eternal destruction and exclusion from the presence of the Lord and from the glory of his might. By the strength of his might alone, God tortures and afflicts those to whom he is intolerable. Therefore, the wicked shall flee and not escape, but shall be seized with anxiety. As that passage in the book of Wisdom says, it shall soon appear dreadful to you, Wisdom 6:6. And in Psalm 20, that is actually 21:9, we read, you will make them as blazing oven when you appear, unquote. Otherwise, whence came the voice, quote, O mountains, fall upon us, and hills cover us, in Hosea 10:8. And in the passage in Isaiah 2, verse 10, enter into the rock and hide in the dust from before the terror of the Lord and from the glow of his majesty, unquote. Or that passage in Job, quote, oh, that thou wouldest hide me in Sheol, that thou wouldest conceal me until thy wrath is past, unquote. Now, remember in the declaration, Luther says he will not adduce anything that's not in Holy Scripture and maintained by them. Well, clearly, he's listing these as sacred Scripture. And he's using it for his version of purgatory because he didn't initially reject purgatory. He kind of had a distorted view of it to begin with. And it's during the 95 Thesis and here in the resolutions, he's arguing his point. In the passage above that we just quoted, Luther transitions from his second point, which he begins with a quote from 2 Thessalonians 1, 8, and 9, followed by Wisdom 6:6, Psalm 21:9, and Hosea 10:8 and following. The preceding context makes it clear that Luther believes he's quoting Scripture to establish a doctrinal point. Wisdom is quoted within a cluster of proto-canonical Old Testament and New Testament passages with no distinction or qualification as to their relative authority. All the quotes, they all share the same canonical status. So let's move on to the next thesis, which would be Thesis 17 in our survey. And again, he uses a Deuterocanonical book. It says, quote, the second type consists of those who have complete faith and are perfect, that is, those who are blessed. These individuals must face death with the utmost confidence and joy, according to the Scriptures, which says, quote, although the righteous fall, he shall not be cast headlong, for the Lord is the stay of his hand, Psalm 37:24. And also, quote, Precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints, unquote. Psalm 116:15. And again, quote, if the just man shall be snatched by death, he shall be at rest. Wisdom 4:7, unquote. So once again, just like we saw with Thesis 15, here in Thesis 17, we see that the Book of Wisdom is being adduced in argument. And just like the other passage, it's within a cluster of proto-canonical citations, in this case, from the Book of Psalms. Now, I need to make this clear that this translation comes from the standard work, Luther's works, edited by Jaroslav Pelikan. It's a 100-volume set or so. And this is a standard translation. Unfortunately, it's not that great of a translation. And I want to call your attention to this, that although the translation says that Luther formally introduces these quotes as saying, according to the scripture, what says, that's actually not present in the Latin. So the Lutheran translator added it because he felt that within this context, Luther is formally adducing these passages in argument. But I just wanted to let you know that this is not part of the original. So we wouldn't count this as a formally introduced citation of wisdom, at least not in this case. Now, again, like I said, this is like Thesis 15, we just said, wisdom is included within a cluster of citations from proto-canonical books. There is no qualification, no distinction as to the relative weight or value. Wisdom is cited as if it's on the same standing as the Book of Psalms. Continuing on in Thesis 35, we read, quote, secondly, I have said that everyone can grant sinners confessional letters as long as remissions of punishment. But I have not said that they should be exhorted or even permitted to buy such things, as the hucksters teach so wickedly and crudely. I prove my argument in the following matter. Then he continues in the next paragraph. Every doctrine of Christ is an exhortation to penance and points to the fact that men should turn from the devil, the sooner the better. As Ecclesiasticus or Sirach says, do not delay in turning to the Lord, Sirach 5:8. The Lord himself says, quote, watch therefore, for you do not know the day or the hour, Matthew 25:13. The Apostle Paul says, let us therefore strive to enter that rest, Hebrews 4:11. The Apostle Peter says, quote, since therefore all these things are to be destroyed, what sorts of persons ought you to be in holy and pious behavior, you who hasten towards the coming of the day, etc. 2 Peter 3:11, 12. And the apostle taught these things because they were eager to do so, not for the purpose of collecting money, but for saving souls, unquote. Now, this quote from Sirach 5:8 may sound familiar because in the last video, when we're looking at the Heidelberg Disputation, Luther cites this very same work in one of the theses in there, and he also formally introduces it in the Heidelberg Disputation. Here in the resolutions, he again employs it, although it's not explicitly cited, or formally cited, I should say. But there are a couple of important things to note here. For example, Luther explicitly states in the closing sentence of the preceding paragraph that he intends the following quotations to prove his theological points, quad probo. So he's very explicit here. He is adducing these as proofs for argument. And of course, this is in lieu of a debate, and he's using these quotations to serve as proof. If you recall, that's exactly the 3 points that he'll deny Second Maccabees in 1519. But now in 1518, he's using them as proof. As with our other examples, again, there is no distinction or qualification made in regards to their authority. Sirach is being adduced in debate to serve as proof. Again, something he denies, 2 Maccabees. So very, very interesting point here in Thesis 35. In Thesis 52, Luther argues, quote, they dared to expound this monstrous doctrine without shame in order to take away from men the fear of God, and through indulgences hand them over to the wrath of God, contrary to the word of the wise one who said, quote, do not be without fear concerning the propitiation of sin or for sin, Sirach 5:5, and the psalmist who understands his faults, Psalm 19:12. So both Sirach and the Psalms are proposed as a standard to which Luther's opponents violate by their quote-unquote monstrous doctrine. Given Luther's introductory declaration that Scripture is capable of refuting purely human assertions, it appears that Luther understands Sirach to be Scripture in its fullest sense, that is, canonical sense. Again, there's no qualification or distinction made between Sirach and the Psalms. So we see here in the resolutions that Luther's use of the Deuterocanon is basically coheres well with what we saw in 1516 and also in the Heidelberg Disputation. In fact, Heidelberg Disputation is almost part and parcel with this. It uses the same text and uses it quite importantly to confirm doctrine. Luther quotes the Deuterocanon and proto-canonical books. No distinction, no qualification, all seem to be the same probative weight. And of course, in 35, we saw that he explicitly states that these are proofs to establish his point. So at this point in Luther's career, he appears to be thoroughly Augustinian. In other words, his views on the canon appear to be just like what Augustine says is canonical scripture, which of course includes the 7 deuterocanonical books. So I'm going to park it right there because we went over a lot of material, and I want to take our time as we're going through each of these disputations to analyze Luther's use and reception of the so-called Apocrypha. And it shows very clearly that in 1516, 1517, 1518, Luther was Augustinian when it came to the canon. He held them to be the same probative weight, that is, it has the same argumentative weight as canonical text. He doesn't show any indication whatsoever of any distinctions or qualifications. They all are part and parcel the same, hence he's following Augustine. So when we come back next time, we're going to look at some more disputes, and eventually we will get to where he denies 2 Maccabees, and then some really surprising things that happen afterwards. So you definitely want to keep watching this series. By the way, folks, if you like what you see here, please subscribe, like, hit the bell, leave some comments. That helps with the algorithm, and let's grow this channel so that people can get all this information. So until next week, I'm Gary Machuda. Take care. Bye-bye, everyone.